Hey guys, this is Brian Townsend
And Internet Pokers.
for CardRunners.com. Here, Internet Pokers played a 5100 heads-up no-limit hold or PLO match against Nikki Jedlicka, who is a very good player, been around for a long time, and I'm going to be helping him analyze the session.
Yeah, so Nikki Jellica is actually an opponent who I've played several times in the past previous to this session. And we've played some pretty high stakes. We've played I think 25-50 to 100-200, and we've had some pretty back and forth matches. But I think I've been mostly on the losing end of most of these matches thus far. And this session, I believe this was around the beginning of the session that I started recording this match. So it should be pretty interesting because Nikki Jedlicka is a very aggressive and very loose opponent, so definitely makes for interesting matches to say the least, and high variance matches at that.
Definitely.
So
So going into this match then, after having played those few matches, what was kind of your general feel or read of his game? Or had you not quite yet formed one?
yeah, well, I mean, I definitely had played him enough to know that one thing that I was looking to exploit coming in was that I think that he tends to call quite a lot, and he's also very aggressive on the flop. So I'm not going to be I'm going to be kind of careful to control pot sizes with hands that I don't want to get check raised with, and I'm also going to be I don't want to be opening a ton of hands pre-flop either because he does three bet pretty aggressively and isn't it doesn't make it very easy to win pots from him when I'm in position. So I don't have a very specific game plan yet, but I'm kind of keeping all those things in mind as I come into this match.
Yeah,
So
I know having played with him, my kind of feel for his game is very similar. He's going to be really aggressive, check raising a lot of flops. Generally, I think he's probably getting it in a touch too light, but maybe it's okay heads up, who knows. Depends on the players. But he's going to be really aggressive on the flop, check raising for value with a lot of hands that he's going to be calling shoves with. Um, so when you do flop your more marginal hands, I do like checking back a lot of flops versus him, kind of slowing down the game and, kind of frustrating him in that way.
yeah, definitely.
So
Okay.
here I see on the right-hand table, I don't know how the action went, but I'm guessing you raised on the button with the deuce-deuce 3-5 double suited, and
Right.
the flop went check-check, and again you check the turn.
Yeah, I believe so. I think this is probably one of those spots where if I do bet the turn, I expect. Well, first of all, one thing that I do know about Nicky is that he really likes calling. He's not a big fan of folding. So not only is he going to check a lot of his aces on the turn to check call, but he's also going to check call a lot of like pairs and marginal draws, of which I think he has a pretty good amount on the turn. And I think there's also a reasonable chance that he might check raise me because he doesn't think that I'd ever have top two pair on this board. So, I mean, obviously it's a spot where when I do pick up a draw and the turn is not an unreasonable card to bluff, that I would just bet it out in my weak flush draw. But this is probably one of the spots where, against Nikki in general, I don't want to be betting too much in this sort of spot that I might expect more fold equity against, the average opponent.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, although I think in this particular case, that ace is such a good card, and you do get so many folds out of like nines or weak kings, or any king even, that I actually probably would have bet the turn. And the reason for this is, if you get check raised, and I don't feel like he's just going to check raise as a complete bluff. I think he'll check raise with much better draws than yours, but really, you don't mind getting check raised off your hand if he's got like a bigger flush draw or whatever he may have. And also I think he's going to check raise, with his sets or maybe with his ace-king type hands. And I kind of disagree. I do think you can have ace-king in this spot. I think it would be fine against a player like Nikki to check back. Even a hand as strong as like, um, ace-king 7-8 or ace-king
But Ace King 7 would be two
seven.
pair.
Okay, I missed that. I couldn't see
Yeah.
the name, but something like maybe Ace King 5-6, where you have like a gutter and top pair, top kicker type of hand.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's definitely true, but I don't think that that's going to be. I mean, it's possible for me to have some good aces up here in the spot. Um, so yeah, betting the turn obviously would have been perfectly fine, but I elected to check back here. Um, I guess yeah, betting the turn probably would have been the standard play here in the spot. And the river comes to 7, and I believe I decide to bluff the river.
Yeah, I think you have to bluff the river here.
Oh, and I bet looks like I bet really small to try to get him to fold, and that worked. So what do you think of that?
I think
That
that's
very small bet on the river.
I think that's great. I mean, you just are looking to fold out a 9, 8, or 7. And I think
Right. Yeah.
it's often enough because people just don't think you're bluffing. They think you're value counting them with like king seven.
Yeah, yeah, because it's very obvious that his hand is very weak. I mean, I don't think my hand looks like King Seven so much. It looks like well, I guess it does kind of look like King Seven, but it looks a lot like maybe I like back into a straight on the river, but I know that he has such a weak hand because he checked 3 times that I need to bet very small in order to get any value at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the straight is definitely in your range. And I also think like some wacky two pair that you rivered, that you had been checking down with him against, I think is in his range.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your bet sizing? I know people do everything from full pot to 500 there to 400. It looks like you're consistently doing 400 then?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I prefer to do 400 against Nicky because I like to keep. I don't like to let pots balloon out of control very quickly because he does like to check raise pretty aggressively. So when he's check raising pot, it's pretty hard to use my positional advantage very well when he can check raise and basically commit a third of his stack every single time that he wants to push a draw on me. So that's kind of why I prefer to make it 400. Also gives him worse odds on a check raise because he's winning less on average. So. And gives me better odds to win the pot at the same time.
Totally.
Because like another thing is that of course Nicky calls a lot on the flop. Not just that he check raises a lot, but he also calls some pretty weak hands. Some of the times too loose. So for that reason as well, I kind of want to be betting smaller so that I don't need him to fold as often in order to show the same sort of profit.
Do you think he is a player who will adjust?
Based on lowering my bet size.
Yeah. So like. A lot of players, if you bet full pot on flops, they're going to be folding, hands like a dry jack 10 on that king queen deuce board. But, if you're betting 400 or 300, they're going to be adjusting and flatting with those hands even out of position. Do you think he's a player?
Right? No, I mean I'm sure he will, but I kind of get the feeling that that even if I were betting a little bit bigger, that he'd still be fairly loose and still wouldn't really like to be giving up pots. I mean, my general feel is not just that he's loose, but that he really kind of tries to win too many pots. And I think that that's not something that would be exclusive to him just, basically just check calling too many hands on the flop when I bet 400.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But of course, betting 600 probably wouldn't be uncalled for. So here I limp a pretty crappy hand. It's Queen 3-4-4, and it's full when he raises me. Do you think that's fine?
I just feel like every time you limp, he's raising. I probably just fold it against a guy like Nicky who's so aggressive.
Right.
Against weak players, I probably play 95 to 100% of my hands on the button, depending on how weak. Against stronger players like Nicky or other good high stakes guys, I think you can really only play like 80 to 85% profitably. So I'd probably that hand away because that's in the bottom. I mean, that hand is just plays. So
I was definitely considering just folding it, but I want to kind of see if he was looking to raise me a lot because I remember when I played him in the past, he had been kind of. Sometimes he would raise a lot of my limps, sometimes he wouldn't. So I wasn't very sure what sort of mood he was in as far as how to react to my limps.
Yeah, I think it's fine to see the mood that he's in.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think it's fine as quote unquote a mood to see the mood that he's in. So
right. So here with the 7-8, I check call or the eights, I guess. 'Cause I've got some backdoor draws here, so I think a pretty standard PO win a lot of the turns, give me extra outs.
Yeah, I think it's a little too thin against a guy like Nicky, to be honest. I think he's probably going to barrel you a little bit too much. And then I think when you do turn something like this, I mean, this really isn't a great spot because you turn something with extra outs, but because of the stack sizes, like, you don't want to just check call again because it sucks when he's got, like, pocket tens or pocket jacks or pocket queens and he gets to showdown. But you don't really be check raising this turn because it's not a great spot to get, another 92 big blinds in on the turn. So I'd probably just go ahead and raise or fold the flop. I think check calling is just a little bit too weak because a lot of the turns that do give you extra outs aren't really that good for you to semi-bluff. I mean, really the only turn that's good for you to semi-bluff that gives you extra outs is the 6 because then you can represent 3-5 and you've got a lot of equity against a hand like 3-5. But any other turn, even like a jack, because there's so many like, I mean, you're just turning a non-met wrap and you're putting in a lot of money and you probably have to after you've called the turn and he's got such a wide range and is betting a lot of turns. You might show a profit, but I just think it's really marginal, and I just go ahead and fold. And there's so many cards he's going to barrel you on. I mean, any like ace, king, or queen, he's going to bet again, and you're going to have to fold. I just fold the flop. I think it's too loose.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. So then I check the turn and I guess see what he's going to do. I mean, it's 7 is in a way one of the better cards for me.
Yeah, I mean,
and he ends up betting pretty quickly.
if you check call the flop, the 7's a great card, but it's like, I mean, it's still not a great spot here. Like,
Right, yeah, of course.
but like, really, anything that he gets it in with you against, you're kind of you're pretty far behind his range when you do get it in. So I don't know. I just think.
Oh, looks like I check raise the turn pretty committingly here.
Yeah.
So essentially, I'm putting in about 9K into this pot. So risking about 9K to win 2,500. So I guess my thought process here was that not only would he be betting any overpair, but he'd also be betting any lower two pair than the 9-7, and I don't think he'd be getting all in with any of them except for 9-7 or a set. So I guess that was my thought process here, and I do have some equity, not a ton, but some, even if he gets it in with 9-7 here.
Yeah, I
what do you
think
think?
when you check call the flop, you got to raise the turn. It's a good turn for you to represent a lot of two pairs with, and you will fold all those hands. But I mean, I'm not even so sure he folds like queen, queen, jack 10 or something, where he's got a gutter and a pair of queens. Like, he probably does, but he might not. And it's just like, yeah, you turned one of the better hands, the better cards for your hand, and you're still not really thrilled about check raising. So I just think the flop PO is a little bit too loose. Actually, I think it's
Right.
too loose, to be perfectly honest. There's just too many cards that he's going to barrel you with. And when he doesn't barrel you with, he's going to pot control with. And you're going to be out of position with only one street left to bet, and you just won't be able to bluff him off his hands. I mean, kind of calls a lot. And when the turn's a 3, if he's got pocket queens, he might check back and just call a river bet or something. Like, I could see him taking that line a lot, and you're just not going to be able to move him off those hands if he uses pot control on the turn. So I just think it's too loose.
Okay, but on the turn, you think the play is fun?
I think once you turn the open ender and the pair of 7s and the pair of 8s, you got to go with it. But I'm not thrilled about it. I do think he's barreling the turn a ton, so you'll show a profit. It's a super dry board, and I think you will fold out a lot of hands, and you have the best hand some of the time. So you will show a profit once you do turn a draw, but it's still not going to be a great spot for you.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And he ends up folding pretty quickly, so it looks like he had some probably weak draw.
Yeah, or just complete. I mean, I think he's just barreling there
Yeah,
a lot,
for sure. So I raise an ace 5, 8-7 on the button, and flop a 5. And I see bet very small. This is something I kind of do when the board comes out really dry. I bet half pot instead of betting 400 or 500. Basically because I don't need to be, it's kind of like the range of hands that are very strong on this board are smaller, so I don't really need to be betting as much to represent having a good hand, in a way.
Yeah,
His bad hands here have no equity at all against my good hands.
that's a fine logic to use. One of the problems is if he's a good player, he's going to adjust by either floating you more lightly with his hands like pocket 8s, pocket 7s, which he might fold to a bigger bet, pocket 6s, and he's also going to be check raising this flop more lightly. So when that's
Well, I mean, I don't think Nicky would ever fold a pair higher than a 5 on this board. Pretty much no matter how much I bet on the flop. But yeah, he definitely can check raise you more often on the flop. But I don't think that actually is. I mean, in a way, that doesn't really change whether I bet 400 or 500 or 300. If anything, I'm risking less to win the same amount. If he's check raising me more when I bet 300, that's not a lot different from him check raising me more when I bet 400. You know what I'm saying?
well, he does have better odds on his check raise because he has to check raise smaller. Is the only thing.
Right, but he's winning a smaller amount at the same time.
True. So
Yeah. So I mean, I think that betting 300 in the slot is usually going to be the best against the average opponent. And on the turn, I just check it down. I river a 5, and he bets 800, and I call pretty quickly. You think that's fine?
I think yes, because I think you're going to induce a lot of floats when you bet half pot on that flop. I think he's going to just call and see what you do on a lot of turns. And I think that he might even just put in kind of a like, I don't know what to do with my mid pair. You know, when he has pocket eights or whatever, he might just kind of bet because he doesn't really want to check call type of thing.
Right.
So I think it's fine.
So he shows me a complete float, king high with no real redraw.
Yeah.
And I take the pot down.
So it's worth noting that, well, I mean, the hands he's playing out of position, I mean, king 9, 6, 7. It's
3 suited to the 9, pretty weak hand.
Yeah, I mean, suited to the king, I think it's fine. Suited to the 9, I think that's a pretty thin defend there. So here on the right, you bet more than the queen, queen, 5 flop. Why is that?
I think it's because the lowest card on the board is smaller. So when I have a hand, like I can represent more overpairs here that are not as concerned about building a big pot.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
So yeah, I guess that's vaguely the logic I was using. And also there are more draws on this board as well. Whereas obviously on queen 5-5 there's absolutely no draws. So yeah, so the I guess on the left I checked down on the flop with my bare kings, and he checked it back, and then I just bet the river 400.
Yeah, I actually don't even mind check raising that river, just because I think I don't think he really has an ace ever, and if he has anything less than an ace, he's not gonna call you with like Jack 10, 6, 7 that he checked the flop all the way down. If he has a smaller pair, it's probably gonna go for a value bet. And
yeah, that's probably true. I probably should have check raised the river.
Yeah, but I think it's fine betting as well. But I think check raising is best with a hand like this. I don't think he ever has pocket aces. I think you basically always have the best hand, and I think he's going to either bluff or bet all of his value range. You know, if he gets there with pocket 5.
Yeah, and also on the turn, it's a spot where you'd think he'd bet most of his misses on the flop. So if he'd check back a hand like Jack 10, 7, 6, he'd probably want to bluff that turn because he can represent a queen so well.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, so most of his range on the river is going to be pairs, I think. So check raising on the river would have been best. Yeah. And so then on the right there, did you see how the hand played out on the right?
Yeah, so you bet 400 on the flop. Turn went check check. River he looked to check raise.
Yeah, and then I checked it back.
Checked it back, yeah.
Yeah, he had Jack 8, so he rivered about.
Yep.
So I guess pretty standard way to play that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's worth noting that, you know, he's peeling these flops pretty lightly, and we should be barreling a lot on those boards. I mean, if he's peeling there with a Jack 8, you know, we have such good odds when we have even 3 overcards or 4 overcards to go ahead and bet the turn that betting that turn will be so profitable by the times we improve versus and with the times that he actually folds a hand like Jack 8.
So you would have bet there with the King Jack on the turn?
No, I would not have bet with a King Jack, but if the turn had bricked off and I had had another over, I think it's worth noting that we need to be bluffing him a lot in the future there.
Right, okay.
Because he is peeling the flop so lightly, and, you know, what's he going to do if you bet again on the turn with a Jack 8? Like, it's just a really tough spot for him. So I think we should be noting that for the future on those types of boards.
Yeah, it's definitely because I know that I knew coming into this match that his flop peeling range would be really wide in most situations. Yep. So definitely barreling good turns was a big part of my plan.
But yeah, with the Jack, there's no real value, and I mean you're not really going to extract much value. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I 3-bet a pretty good wrap here, and flop comes King Jack Deuce with a flush draw. I think I just elect to bet here. What's your? Is there any?
You got to be really careful in spots like this that you don't c-bet too much of your range, because you're c-betting all your total air, and even when you have something like aces that kind of missed, or even ace 10 9, you know, with no spades, you really don't want to be bet calling. So a player like Nicky is going to play these flops really aggressively when he flops any pair in a flush draw or a wrap or, you know, a pair in a open-end straight draw even he might play really aggressively. And
Probably even a pair and a gutter he's going to be shipping on me here.
yeah, maybe. I mean, he might be because a lot of people wouldn't because of the flush draw, but he very well might be. Basically, you need to be really careful because he's going to show such a profit on his semi-bluffs on these boards that betting, re-raising pre and betting 13, 14, 1500 and having him ship, I mean, he's going to be shipping a lot. So you got to be really, really careful that you balance in a lot of check folds here. And you need to balance that in against a good player. I mean, you just
Yeah, absolutely. If I had like a 6, 7, 8, 9 or something, I probably wouldn't even bet the slot because I think, like you said, Nikki loves to jam these sorts of boards and commit himself a lot.
So actually, with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I probably just go ahead and check fold because I think with these stacks, Nikki is check shoving or he's I think he's either shoving or he's folding. Like you said before, you think he shoves a pair and a gutter. I mean, I think that's a really low end of the range. I don't know if he just shoves something like ace, queen, jack, 6. I don't know if he just shoves that. I doubt it. But basically, I would rather just bet your hands with absolutely no equity and just check a hand like this and hope that he gives you a free card. So yeah, I think betting's okay for the first time, but against a player like Nikki, it might not be profitable here. So
Right. Okay. Well, I ended up betting
end table
1300 and he
standard.
falls pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. And on this board, I'd be bet calling probably up against Nikki, man, maybe even 200 big blinds if I'd been re-raising a lot with one back door in the gutter.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can see he's only got 5K behind, so it's even easier.
5K,
so.
it's like, how can we get it in? But if he had 15K and we had 15K, I would still be bet calling. Maybe if we'd been playing extremely aggressive up to 200 big blinds, I'd probably still be bet calling. And then after that, it gets pretty hairy. But.
Right. So he shows up with a pretty good draw here, with a pair and a gutter and some 2-pair draws, I guess.
Yeah, you're pretty far, actually.
Right. Well, he whips, so it's all good.
Yeah. Well, not that far. Probably what? Would you guess? He probably had 55, 60% equity?
Yeah, probably around 58 or something.
Yeah.
Percent equity on that hand. So on the right here, I show up with some bare aces. And I don't remember what I do in the slot. What would be your plan on the slot on the right with the bare aces and the gut shot or the straight draw? My bad.
The open net, non-nut, open net. I'd probably just go ahead and fold. You have against somebody who's opening every hand on the button or 90% hands of the button. You've got you've got like 60% equity out of position. The problem is, I feel like he's just going to barrel you a lot on boards like this, and you really can't continue on any turn. Even if you turn a straight, like. You really don't be calling.
Well, I mean, one thing is that Nikki does know that I do like to check call flushes a lot on the flop because I know that Nikki likes to barrel. So I don't think that he's going to be barreling this board all the time when I check call him on the flop. And I mean, of course, he knows that I'm going to be check calling a lot of weak flush draws, a lot of weak flushes. I mean, and he's not going to think that he has the image to get me off of those. So I think there's a reasonable chance that if I do check call here, I can get my hand to showdown without trying too hard.
Maybe I probably just as a standard check fold this flop. This is just a pretty terrible flop for you.
Okay.
But yeah, I just go ahead and check folds. I think peeling with the 2 back doors is fine on the first table.
Right. So on the right, I end up peeling the flop, and then I just check the turn. And on the left, I'm just trying to check it down.
Yeah.
Yeah? Were you about to say something?
I mean, even when the turn tens, it's like there's so many hands that have so much equity against you, and it's just not really...
Well, I mean, I can very easily bluff the river when he checks back on the turn.
Yeah, that's a possibility too. But I think he's a player who that might not be the best strategy against. And then there's like rivers like this where he might turn his hand into a bluff, and it's just a really tough spot to check call with aces,
Yeah, I think this is also not a great river to bet myself because
you can't get
I don't think that I don't think that he's one thing he's fairly likely to bluff raise me here if I do bet, and then also I mean it doesn't seem like there are a ton of 2 pairs that I can represent.
So I mean even a hand like that had like 35% equity against ours probably on the flop. Well, no, because the 9s were no good. Probably 30 to 33% equity against ours. Like
yeah.
And
Well, I
then
mean, that's true, but also my hand is pretty good bluffing equity when I do get to the river and the board doesn't pair. Because I'm pretty sure my plan here was if the river blanked out, I was just going to bet it
you were
because I
going
know that
to
he's checking back a lot of two pairs and stuff on the turn. So, and I mean, he's going to check behind a bear 8-9 as well. So I think that when I check all this my hand on the flop, if the board does come out this way and he doesn't show any more aggression, I can easily bluff the
you
river
think you would go ahead.
on the side of proof.
I think
Yeah,
if you're willing to bluff the river, then I think it's okay if the board doesn't pair. I think that's a reasonable
right.
strategy. But I'm still not sold on the flop check call. But yeah, I think it's okay if you're willing to bluff the river. I think it's okay.
Mm-hmm. All right, fair enough.
I'll change my opinion of it then.
So, more bear aces here. And this time I flop just pair Townsend and overpair.
Yeah, I just go ahead and probably just check raise this flop, check raise fold it. The reason here is you have the blockers to
The nut flush draw?
the nut flush. You have the blockers also to any wrap that he can have. Any draw he's going to have is a non-nut one. It's a board where he never thinks you're raise folding. Never in his wildest imagination. So I would just go ahead and make it like 1600 and fold to a shove. Just because I don't think he's really going to want to put it in with something like, even Queen Jack with Queen Jack of diamonds. Like, it's just not a great spot for him to get the money in. And I
Right.
think,
So then if you check raise him here, close to pot and he calls and you just check fold.
depends what the turn is. I probably continue on pair turns, and if the turn is a diamond, I probably
But which pairs on the turn?
I would bet all pairs on the turn, and
All
then
pairs. So
I'd bet for value with all pairs. And then if the turn was a diamond, I would probably bet again because there'd be.
So you'd bet a king if the turn paired a king, you'd bet here.
Yeah, I would bet like half pot or whatever. I think that's fine.
Seems more like a bluff than a value bet when you're betting a king.
It is, but I mean, do you think that when you check to him, you're going to induce any action from him? Like after you check raise up the board pairs and you check, I mean, any competent player is going to be like, okay, this guy's never check folding because if he has no showdown, he's checking. So yeah, I mean, you're really never getting called by a better hand,
Right.
by a worse hand, but then like you're not really inducing action when you check to him because anybody who's got like a straight draw is going to be like, yeah, sure, I'm going to bet when the board pairs after he check raised me on the flop. Like players just don't do that, you know.
Right.
So I think I would definitely go ahead and bet for value against his straight draws and type stuff. If the turn was a diamond, I'd probably bet again to get him off his straight draws as well.
Okay. So instead, I take the super passive line of just check calling. And
Yeah,
then
and
I
you
check the
got
turn.
you get a great turn for you, but man, there are some tough turns to play. You know, there's just so many turns that are really, really hard to play. And even this one, if he puts in two more bets, you know, I mean, are you just going to call him down? Like, it's just,
Yeah, I mean, my plan was definitely to calm down 3 streets so long as the board didn't
didn't
get
get
any
what's.
uglier. Yeah.
I don't know. If he bets the turn and bets the river, I think the river's really close if you should check call or check fold, to be honest. You know, I just think there's not too much you're peeling the turn with that he thinks you're going to fold on the river if the river bricks out. You know what I mean?
Now, I don't really think that's true because I think he knows that I'm going to be check calling. Well, first of all, I can have a lot of hands like, King Jack 9x, whatever, sorts of top pairs or middle pairs with straight draws or stuff like that. And he knows that I don't give him a lot of credit, but he also knows that it's going to be very, very hard for me to call in the river with a hand like King Jack, especially when he can rep, King 10 and basically beat any of the hands that I'm check calling on the flop because he knows that I'm putting more bets in with King 10 at some earlier point in the hand.
Yeah.
So he knows that I don't have that. So I think from his perspective, it's not a bad spot at all for him to be bluffing on the river, try to get me off of any, ace, king, king, jack, whatever that I'm peeling here. So I think with aces, when I do get to the river, it's a pretty mandatory call if Nicky goes 3 streets, just because of how aggressive he is and the fact that he knows that I can fold pretty good hands to him.
I think in that spot, king jack and aces are pretty close to the same hand. I don't think he's value betting you with ace king or king 10 all that often. And
I think he would bet king 10 3 times.
um,
I'm presuming the river doesn't get any worse.
maybe. I think king 10 on the river is pretty thin value bet. I don't know. He might, but I think you would need.
Yeah, it's thin, but yeah, Nicky would almost certainly bet king ten on the river if the river was like a five.
Yeah, maybe. I don't. Yeah, probably would, but I mean, I think when you check call the turn, your range. I honestly, you know what? I'm not even so sure he bets king ten on the river. I mean, I think your range when you check call the turn is king four, some hand with a random four that had a flush draw, or maybe some open end straight draw like queen jack, 4-5 double suited, or something like aces. And betting, king ten on that river for value against that range really isn't doing well. I actually don't know if he would bet the river if it bricked off with a king ten. I think it'd be really, really thin if he did.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be the best play in the book, but I'm pretty sure that he would do
Yeah.
it, to be
Well, you
honest.
played more against him recently, so you would know better.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I definitely see your point. And he bets 950, which isn't a huge bet on this.
And this is just auto call. I mean, he's barreling anything he has on the turn. But I really think he gives up a lot. When you check call here and he bricks a 5 and he bets again, I think aces is in a lot of trouble. Like, if he is to bet this river, I think a fold is actually probably all right. I mean, you see he's checks with total miss.
Yeah, but he was barreling that turn with absolutely nothing.
You need to call the turn 100% because he's going to put you call the turn on like a king four, some random low four, maybe a good king or aces yourself. And when he bets the river, I really don't think aces are good often enough to call. I think he barrels the turn constantly, and you should call even with a 10 on the turn. But the river, I think you need to consider folding a hand as strong as aces. I just don't think he barrels it that much. But who knows? It's hard to tell, and he'll adjust, of course. So,
Right.
but definitely an interesting hand, and I don't hate the way you play it. I probably just go ahead though and raise fold the flop because people never think you're raising that flop as a bluff, as a pure. So and I think it's a great spot to turn your hand.
Yeah, I definitely like that play. I haven't actually seen a lot of people do it before. Well, of course, you wouldn't see it anyway because they'd fold.
Yeah. But you can guess. I mean, I know who does it is Brian Hastings. That's the guy who kind of get me to think about it. But when the flop comes,
that does make sense. Yeah.
Jack 8, 6, and he check raises you, and you shove, and he folds. You're pretty sure he's got something like a bear ace.
Right. Yeah. I've actually played Stinger a couple of times, and he completely destroyed me both times I played him at PLO. But yeah, I like playing him. I kind of realized he was doing something like that, but it never really occurred to me to integrate into my own game. So it's definitely something good to do. Okay, so here, did you follow this hand here? The ace queen.
So yeah, you bet flop, bet turn.
No, what I did was I checked the flop, and then he bet the turn, and then I raised him.
Okay. Yeah, I think against a guy like Nicky, this is a good spot to value bet the river. I don't think you're ever.
So what do you think of the turn play though?
I think it's bad because it's too hard to represent anything.
You don't think I can represent like a Jack 5-3 whatever, like crappy Jack that I check behind on the flop?
I mean, what do you check behind that you raise the turn wanting to get it in? He had 100 big blinds, I'm guessing, to start the hand, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I could have I don't know, some Jack with low cards that I didn't want to bet on the flop.
But you're not raising the turn unless you have Jack 4 specifically.
No, I would raise the turn if I had a weak Jack here.
Would you really? Wow. Because I mean,
because Nicky's betting the turn with so many hands that he's going to call the raise with.
If you hold a Jack, I don't think there's that many he is. I think raising the turn with a weak Jack is pretty marginal, to be honest. I think even with a hand.
Nicky bets out turns, and I check behind the flop a very, very big percent of the time. And from my past experience playing with him, he doesn't like to. Like, if he had, like, an 8 with a gutter here, he wouldn't fold. If he had, like, something with a flush draw, he wouldn't fold. I mean, he might not even fold a bear nut flush draw here on the spot. Like, if he had, ace, queen, I don't know, whatever, with a flush draw, there's a pretty good chance that he calls to do something on the river.
So what's your plan if he re-raises you on the turn? Are you just shipping it in?
No, I would just fold if he re-raised me on the turn.
So then that seems extremely...
With this hand, you mean with the
Well,
Jack?
no, I mean if you held, like, Jack... say you held Jack 9, 7, 6, let's say. Just for
Jack 9, 7. I'd bet that on the flop. I'd never check a Jack 9, 7, 6 on the flop.
Because
but more of a hand like like a queen jack deuce 5 or something.
Yeah, let's say that.
Uh, yeah. I mean, if I raise him on the turn and then he 3-bet me, I'd probably fold. But the reason for that is not. I mean, it's exploitable, but that doesn't matter because I don't think that he's exploiting that.
See, I
You know.
think he would be. I think he's smart enough to realize that you're bluff raising that turn often enough, and I think when he doesn't have showdown, he would rebluff you there with things like flush draws or straight draws or whatever else it is, or just some random hand, just because he would want to rebluff you, because he wouldn't think you would have anything as strong enough to call a turn shove with.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's possible.
I
I
think
mean,
he's a player that he
from
would.
my experience with him though, I've had a reasonable amount of. Well, I mean, I haven't had a huge amount of success, but he hasn't really ever 3-bet me out of a pot. I don't remember him doing that when I check behind the flop and raise the turn.
Well,
Um,
I could
but
see him
it's
putting.
possible then on the sort of board texture that he might do that. Yeah.
I could see him putting in a 3-bet bluff, which is why I wouldn't really like raise.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that he's not intelligent enough to know that that's a very valid option. But I'm just not sure that he would do that rather than just, I guess, floating.
See, I think he would because he's out of position. He has to put in that 3-bet because if he floats out of position, you'll just check down any pair that you have or whatever it is you may have. So I think if
Yeah,
he has no showdown and he's going to want to rebluff you, he's going to have to do it on the turn.
right.
So I just don't think it's a great spot to raise a jack like that. I think he should be doing more for your value range, and balance that by checking back a jack 4 here, and then you can raise call a jack 4 to put that in your range.
Right.
So I think he's a good enough player to realize that. So
Okay. Well, once he calls the turn and I get to the river, I'm obviously going to value bet my straight.
yeah, I think half pot like looks like you're doing here is great, and fold to a shove is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely no reason to call a turn river check raise. I mean, even
Yeah.
with like Jack 4, Jack 5, I'd probably fold to a river check raise.
So here on the right, I actually peel with a pretty weak hand. Do you think it's okay to call out of position with?
No, I think it's just too junky.
Okay.
I do know the draw though. I play hands like that, especially when they're suited to the ace too often. But I think it's too weak out of position. He's too good of a player,
Right.
and I like your turn check. There's no reason to bet the turn,
Right. And I check the river as well because I figure there's a pretty good chance that he tries to push me off of whatever hand I come up with here.
Yeah,
But he had what do you have here? Just, I guess a pair of eights.
yeah, pair of eights. So. Yeah, I think checking and betting the river are both fine there. Just because I think he'll
Right.
think you're bluffing there a lot. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was my initial reaction was to just bet out the river, but I figured he'd probably never really show up with a hand here that he could call with, but he might bluff to get me off of some 2 pair, maybe, you know, whatever.
yeah, I actually
Okay,
against Nicky on the second table. I don't mind checking this flop with your aces. Betting's also fine because there aren't really many cards you can continue with on the turn. So,
Right, yeah. I mean, I think with a hand like aces here, I'd prefer to bet on the flop than to check it behind because, like I said, Nicky bets the turn when I check behind the flop so often
yeah,
that it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to play my hand and play it profitably when I have the initiative. Even though he is going to be check raising a pretty wide range, especially on a board of this texture.
yeah.
So,
I think it's close. I don't know what I like best, if I like checking the flop or just bet folding the flop. Without a flush draw, I think I would actually prefer just checking it back because there are more turns that you can continue with. Like if a queen rolls off or something like that, you can peel one off, see what he does on the river. So,
right. But I mean, I think in a lot of ways, his bluffing opportunities are more expanded when I do check behind because it is such an easy board for him to bet twice when I check behind and call one bet.
yeah,
I mean, I kind of think that it's even harder for me to get my hand to show down, or to me to show my hand down if I do check, because even if I do call a turn like a queen, he's not at all going to be afraid of bluffing a huge amount of the rivers that come, because he just knows he can represent any draw on the board in any 2 pair, and he wants to.
yeah, and I think that's fine that you balance that by checking medium flush draws and straight draws on this board, and then you'll have good hands to call with on the river. And when things are off, you can call with your aces. I think it's fine to check back a flop like this, though I would like it more if there was no flush draw to check it back.
Mm-hmm.
What would your plan be if you got raised on the turn?
Um, I guess just fold.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of seems like I don't think he would really. I mean, because like I said, Nicky likes appeal a lot,
Yeah.
so I don't think there are a ton of hands that he'd feel the need to bluff with. I mean, I can't really think of any that he wouldn't check raise on the flop and that he felt like he needed to bluff with on the turn that he couldn't just peel or do something silly with.
I know a lot of people who will bluff that turn. I don't know about Nicky so much, but there's a lot of people I play against who love to bluff raise turns like this. And
Mm.
rightfully so, because people barrel these turns all the time. So there's
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
people just have, no pair, no draw.
I don't think but I don't think there's a lot I can do with something that has so little equity when it gets called. I mean, I'm going to be barreling it enough with actual draws that I think it would make more sense to if I did want to shove some hands on him to shove a draw rather than to shove an overpair. Don't you think?
Yes, I do think that's true, though. Shoving a draw, you might be drawing dead to 7-5.
Yeah, yeah.
That, or Jack
Right.
5 that, I would guess shoving a draw and shoving an overpair are probably actually kind of close in that a lot of times when you shove a draw, you're just drawing dead, and you're always going to have two outs when you shove your overpair. Because I don't know how often he just, I don't know if you're going to see just ace 5 that much. So I bet it's about, actually I bet it's about even if you shove a draw or if you shove aces here in terms
Right.
of when called. Because when he folds, it doesn't matter what you have essentially. And when he calls, he's going to have a boat a lot, I think. Jack 5, 7-5, or, another 5, which has, and your draw is only going to have 20-25% equity against that. So.
Right. So he'd be inclined if he did check raise you here to possibly shove.
Yeah, I think it's a fine spot. I think it's fine to just ship it in. And I think people bluff, it depends on the player, obviously, but a lot of players are raising this turn a lot. And rightfully so, they should be because people are barreling this turn because you would barrel this turn with pretty much anything you had in your range to get him off all his weak draws. And people adjust to that by check raising these turns really lightly. So, I don't know. I haven't played quite enough with Nicky to know if I would shove here, but there's some players I would shove this turn with 100% of the time because they're raising all their sets and stuff on the flop, and they're not raising. They're like passive enough where they don't raise the turn with 7-5 or Jack 5, but they're aggressive enough where they'll still be bluffing the turn a lot. So there's really almost no hands they can have. I actually face a lot of opponents like that. So.
Right. Um, so on the left, I peel with Queen 9 10 3 suited the Queen. Is this a standard peel pre-flop?
I think it's pretty thin.
Pretty thin.
Yeah,
So you'd just be folding
I would fold that. I mean, it just doesn't play very well. I'm out of position, but it does when the flop is Ace King 9 with diamonds. But
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I think defending.
roll.
It's one of those spots where you have equity, but you really can't profitably play it just because he has position. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you have immediate odds to call, but because of future bets, I don't think you can.
Right. But he's shorter. He's only 50 big blinds, so I think it becomes easier to call a wider range when they're shorter because you can you can commit yourself with more marginal draws and it's not as big a deal.
I think that's true. I still think it's pretty thin, to be honest.
Right.
So
Okay.
just plays so poorly.
Right. Well, I flopped on a flush, of course, so I go for a smallish sort of check raise, which I don't think he's going to give a lot of credit because he's Nicky.
Yeah.
And he makes a bigger than min re-raise, actually pretty kind of unnecessarily big re-raise on this board with 5K.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think he should either min re-raise or flat call.
Yeah, that seems much better because he's communicating the exact same thing to me no matter how much he raises, which is that he has the nut flush.
I think the reason why, at least maybe I'm projecting, but the reason why I raise bigger here is because I'm bluffing and I don't want them to reshove when I min re-raise them because I feel like that induces more. That's like
Right.
my own projection of it, and I don't know if that's what he's thinking or not. But yeah.
Well, I mean, if with 5K behind, it doesn't make a lot of sense for an opponent to shove over a min raise. I mean, wouldn't it just make a lot more sense for them to just min raise back and risk less when you do have the queen of diamonds? Or
Yeah,
the flush.
people don't. You
People
mean,
don't do that.
wait, so you're talking in Nikki's shoes?
No, I'm talking in your opponent's shoes when you min raise them, or if you did min raise them. Um,
I
okay, like
just,
so you said hypothetically, if you were in Nicky's shoes here, that you would min raise
I
that
think min
you
raising,
might think that he might be better to min raise
I think
against a good opponent.
I think min re-raising is best for Nikki, but I think the reason why he might have made a bigger re-raise is because it feels like he'll induce more if he does a small re-raise and he's bluffing. At least that's why I would make a bigger re-raise there.
Right.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's not good logic or not good play, but I would. So here on the right, he hasn't been four-betting this much, and I think it's okay to go ahead and four-bet these kings, but it's pretty close, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, my past experience with Nicky has been he's been very, very aggressive with three betting. This session you haven't really seen it, but
Seen it, but yeah,
at the same time we haven't really covered a ton of hands either.
total.
So,
I
the hands that we have seen him play were pretty crappy as well. So,
I think it's okay, but it's close. I'll tell you that. It's really close.
yeah,
Single suited kings here. But I think it's okay because Nikki is very aggressive.
right. Well, I ended up getting it in. If I remember, he ended up having aces here.
Yeah, just like it. I think when he five bets there, he's gonna have aces pretty much all the time.
Right. So on the queen, I end up flatting. Do you think that's fine, or do you think I should just shift on the flop?
I think you should have shipped on the flop because when he made that re-raise, I don't think he's ever gonna bluff the turn when you flat. And
You don't think he might possibly put me on a float?
no,
I mean, if I ship here, he's folding all of his bluffs, but he might. There's just a small, sort of very minuscule chance that he does put me on a float when I call his re-raise, and then I like a check
there
down
is
the river.
zero chance. But man, I mean that's a pretty elaborate check rate to the flop when he only has 5K. Call the three bet to see what he does on the turn when he's got less than half a pot left, or a little more than half a pot size bet left. I mean,
Right. Well, I mean, if flatting here with the suited queen is or the queen high flush is bad, then floating can't be bad, right? Because if it's obvious that I have the queen high flush here, then
that's
floating
true.
should work.
Yes, technically you're right, but I think he's going to have enough value hands in his range that he's shoving that floating won't be profitable.
Right.
You know?
Well, maybe I just read his bet size perfectly. Who knows? So I end up checking, doing this sort of very fishy play here, and then I ship the river.
I mean, I think you look really strong here, but
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to not look strong after I call that flop three bet,
totally.
and he snap calls me, and of course I have the nuts, so I can't lose. But I hope I pull up what he had there. All right, so on the right, I show up here with kings and a jack 10.
This is
What's
interesting.
your standard play here?
This is really interesting, I think. Now, if I know an opponent, if I'm playing an opponent like you, and I start to see that you're c-betting as much as you are in re-raise pots, I'm going to take advantage of that. And I think Nikki will as well. If I see you just c-betting with kings in a gutter here, there's so much incentive for me to bluff shove with things like just a dry 8-9 that you really can't call.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely aware that Nicky's not going to give me a lot of respect when I see bet the sport because he knows that, a lot of my it's a pretty standard spot for a lot of players to check fold here if they have bare aces or bare kings. But I think in the past I've balanced my checking range on this board pretty well because you're probably aware that because Nicky's so aggressive, I don't really want to be c-betting that much on a board like this when I do three bet him because he's going to be committing himself with so many hands. So it's a spot where it's hard. It's obviously not easy to see within this hand, but in the long range I have been kind of balancing my range here so that I don't think I think I can bet here with kings and a gut.
I actually prefer a check on this flop. I would prefer a check raise or a check call on this board rather than a c-bet. And the reason for that is when you check raise, basically you're representing 9-10. And I think a player like Nicky actually would give a check raise on a board like this a heck of a lot of respect. Even with a hand I think he would fold 8-9 for sure. 8-7, I think he would even consider folding if you check raise this flop. And he viewed you as straightforward. I think a check call is fine as well because you represent something like 4-5, and he might try to not barrel you off that. So I think check calling is fine, and I think because a very standard line people use is they flop something like 4-5, ace king, whatever they have, and they check call with it. And I think Nick's competent enough to realize that's a line that people use. So I think both check calling and check raising are fine. I don't like c-betting that much on a board like this, to be honest.
Okay.
And I think when you check raise, he might bet like 1,200, you make it 32 and can fold to a shove or whatever. Because now this is pretty gross,
Right.
Like what, it's just really tough. And barreling this turn is just pretty horrible, I think, to be honest.
You think so?
I mean, I think if you're doing it with this wide of a range, he's good enough. He's going to pick up, and he's just going to start shoving on you. And, good players are going to adjust. I mean, when I see somebody who's c-betting too much, you just take such advantage of it by turning, by just value shoving your two pair here, It's too likely that he has something like two pair or a non-nut straight or, maybe even he just peeled with some random 8 against you. I'll start doing that if I see people are c-betting this much. You're just giving them such good odds to rebluff you, and I think good players are going to take advantage of that. And I think it's a little exploitable, to be honest.
Right. I think he actually ended up disconnecting.
Yeah, it looks like it.
And timed out of both pots. Let me actually fast forward a little bit.
Okay.
Let's see here.
So he had ace.
Yeah, so he did it. I have no idea what he had.
Well, he had aces in that when you had this flush hand.
Oh yeah, he had pocket aces that hand.
It's an interesting line that he took.
Yeah, that's very rather strange, I think.
Yeah, it almost doesn't make sense because he 3-bets the flop because I'm assuming he's bluffing the flop or he thinks you have just the bear or queen often enough. But then he calls the river. It's like
but it doesn't make any sense to bluff the flop if you think he's bluffing. Obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So his play is just kind of nonsensical there.
I agree. I think that's a very strange line he took.
Uh-huh. Do you know how long we've been going?
No, I do not. Let me see.
I think we might be
55 minutes, so I guess we should wrap it up. Why don't we just do conclusion and they can tie it all in?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he's sitting out anyway, so I don't know when he actually sits back in. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I guess from what you've pointed out, it seems like I've been c-betting a little bit too much, especially in 3-bet pots, although we only really ran into maybe like three 3-bet pots within this session. But definitely I think overall I am on the lookout for not c-betting too much against Nicky because he is so aggressive and he doesn't like to give a lot of people credit when they try to rep big hands. I mean, what do you think overall about how I played Nicky here?
I thought you played really well, except for a few spots a few of the theory spots I thought that we got into where you were betting a little too much when checking back and letting him induce would be good. And also, I guess the reason why I thought you were c-betting in re-raise pots too much is because if you're c-betting with a hand like kings with a gutter on the 6, 7, 8 board, you're really representing. I mean, you're really c-betting with almost your entire range there. If you're c-betting,
right. I mean, I kind of perceive King Jack 10 as a pretty bad hand to check call with. Like, I would think more of a better hand to check call would be like Ace, King, Queen 8 or something.
See, I would
improve more easily to 2 pairs.
No, I would much prefer because when you check call, you're not representing what you actually have. You're representing something like a non-nut straight or something, and when you represent something like a non-nut straight, he's not going to try to bluff you off that with 2 pair very often. At least most players don't. Some do.
Right.
So that's why I think it's better to check call with something like that. Plus, you do have 4 nut outs or 3 nut outs if he has the nut straight. So I think that is actually a better hand than something like.
Yeah. I guess that's true. And I guess I wasn't really thinking very deeply about the gut shot.
Yeah. So
But
overall, I guess you got to be really careful against good players. Against weak players, hey, c-bet all day. They don't think about your range. But if I'm in Nikki's shoes and I see that you re-raise me with King, King, Jack, 10 double suited, which is perfectly reasonable, and you see bet a flop like that, I know you're going to have so many misses in your range that I can just bluff shove or value shove even. It's not even bluff shoving, but if I flop something like bottom two pair there or top and middle pair there, against a lot of players, I would consider folding or just flatting and folding a turn because I know they're not c-betting a lot. But against a player like you, I know I would just show a profit by just raising because there's so many hands in your range that you have to fold, much less the times that you have, your ace, king, queen, 10 double suited and you really have no equity. So,
hmm
so I guess you really have to be careful against good players how much you're c-betting because they show such a profit by shoving as for value even over your semi-bluffs or over your c-bets that they can really, really show a great profit against you in those re-raise pots.
Right. Well, I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, this session wasn't too long, but I ended up winning in the end against him. I think we had a couple more all-ins, and then I ended up coming out on top. But definitely, Nikki is somebody who does give me a good amount of trouble just because of how aggressive he is, and I guess, like you pointed out, my excessive c-betting might be a part of the problem as to why why I'm having so much trouble against Nikki in general.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but I
mean,
think he's a very good opponent, and he's definitely he's also pretty fun to play because forces you to play so many big pots and get into a lot of big decisions.
yeah, he's definitely a good player. So,
Yeah,
thanks for having me review this. I thought it was very interesting.
yeah, and thanks for all your advice. I definitely learned a lot from this session.
Right. This was
Um,
Brian Townsend.
and Internet Pokers for CardRunners.com. Thanks everybody for watching.
Talk to you guys later.
All right.